Good afternoon and evening, everyone, and welcome to Stamp Talks presented by the Royal Philatelic Society Canada. Tonight we have Arnie telling us about interrupted mail, which is always a very interesting and fascinating area of collection. Arnie is a retired engineer and former member of both the Burlington and Hamilton Stamp Clubs. His collecting passion is for Canadian uncover and used varieties, especially constant plate varieties on the Victorian issues. He is not currently in Antigua. He is in Canada. I can verify that. I saw him with my own eyes the other day, and I don't think he hopped on an airplane straight after that. He's currently a member of the Brantford and Oxford, Ontario Stamp Clubs. We would like to thank Longley Auctions. Our sponsor for Stamp Talks is Stamp Paddles. Longley Auctions is a public auction firm specializing in selling Canadian postal history, large worldwide collection, stamps, postcards, and philatelic literature. So be sure to check out Longley Auctions, longleyauctions.com. And now for our land acknowledgement. A second to share my screen. Share, 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 share. Last time I did this, we had some problems, so.
Like many other organizations in Canada, the Board of Directors of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada has chosen to acknowledge Indigenous peoples in Canada with the following statement. As a step towards reconciliation, the RPSC acknowledges that our national office in Toronto stands on the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Our national office is also covered by Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. Furthermore, we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples did not give up the lands that they had been on for thousands of years that now constitute Canada. We also acknowledge that Europeans did not discover Canada or arrive on an uninhabited land. The RPSC acknowledges that Canada is covered by many treaties and modern lands, resources, and self-government agreements with Indigenous peoples, and that the provisions of many of these arrangements remain unfulfilled. The RPSC further acknowledges that many Indigenous peoples in Canada have not had their rights fully recognized and implemented according to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The RPSC pledges to promote recognition and knowledge of Indigenous peoples in Canada and elsewhere, and their cultures through philately. We will also work towards building positive relationships with Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Okie dokie, thanks, Craig. Well, without further ado, we welcome back our friend, Arnie.
I'll start sharing my screen. And we're going to presentation mode, and here we go. And I'd also like to thank Longley Auctions. It's a wonderful opportunity to present information on stamps, postal history in this case. And the topic is, of course, interrupted mail. And we're looking at specifically here, we're going to look at an airplane crash, some of the various airplane crashes, an American Airlines crash. That's quite unique because it was a domestic flight that crashed in Canada. We'll look at the TCA one, that's fairly common. RCAF, Lam Airways, and another Air Canada flight. We're going to look at a railroad train fire. We're going to look at some shipwreck right from as early as 1896. A couple information about Empress of Ireland. I know there's other people who presented about them. This is a little different presentation on the Ireland. And the RMS Nascopia. It was interesting to investigate that ship and its history. We'll look at a suspension of postal services. We're not going to look at strikes and war issues. We're going to look at another interesting postal suspension. Vandalism and theft. Basically interrupted mail when it didn't get to its delivery because of some unforeseen event. So it starts off with a question. Is American Airlines Flight 1 jinxed? We're looking at American Airlines Flight 1, October 30th, 1941. Regularly scheduled domestic flight from New York to Chicago. First stop was just across the river in Newark. And then up to Buffalo, down to Detroit, South Bend, Indiana, and then on to Chicago. And on this route, this is all part of the American Airlines Flight 1. Flight 1 is their brand, if you want to call it. It's their most important flight, New York to LA. This section was from New York to Chicago. And in between, here's the plane. It's called the flagship Erie. This is the tail number, and that's the correct tail number for the plane that crashed. Here, it crashed on its leg between Buffalo and Detroit at Lawrence Station, just near Shedden, Ontario. And it was witnessed by Viola and Thompson Howe. It was about 10 o'clock at night. Viola was just making Halloween costumes for her kids for the next day when she heard the noise of a low plane. And then they saw that it came down very, very low and then sort of veered and went straight up. It looks like it stalled and then fell back down to earth, killing all L pipe. Here's a photograph from the evening of the crash. And then the next morning, and basically totally destroyed. 3 crew, 17 passengers died. At the time, it was Canada's deadliest aviation disaster. Canadian, U.S., and separate Canadian and U.S. inquiries, including the Canadian Air Force, because they had a base not very far away. And Viola first thought it was just Canadian planes on a training exercise. They never did come up with a cause. They published a book, 2014. The crash site was memorialized in 2018, and they had to put on a play, 2023, that premiered locally with some people who were directly involved or historically, or their family members were involved with this operation. And it's in AMC reference number 411030. And here we're looking at, that's the latest volume. And it describes the crash. Shedden, Ontario American Airlines flight, piloted by Cooper, crashed at 10:10. 694 pieces of mail were salvaged and forwarded from Detroit after 3-line Magenta. 2 covers were known that were forwarded in Detroit ambulances covers. So here's the Philatelic connection. This was postmarked Mount Kisco to Napa, California. And it's recovered. Here's the postal marking, recovered from the plane, damaged October 30th at Shedden, Ontario. They didn't say it crashed, it just said damaged. And here's the ambulance cover for it. Fairly straightforward, also with a more important marking. No postage required. So when I saw that there was, when I saw in the description there were only 2 ambulance covers, I asked AAMC, where's the second one? And I was able to get that one. Here's the second one. Also with the ambulance cover. But the question was, is flight number 1 jinxed? Well, here's the crash site. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there. Is it jinxed? January 14th, 5 years earlier, in 1936, AA Flight 1, a DC-2 this time, Memphis to Little Rock. The flight was New York to LA overall. This was just one segment. Crashed 14 minutes after departure into a swamp. Again, no cause was ever identified. And here's a photograph, compliments of Wikipedia. Wonderful resource. But is that enough to be considered jinxed? What about AA Flight 1, again in 1962? The Boeing 707 from New York to LA took off and within 2 minutes crashed into a pumpkin patch, killing all 87 passengers and 8 crew. Cause was an autopilot malfunction. Obviously, the pilots had switched on autopilot, and then whatever happened, they couldn't fix it. And here's the crash site again, compliments of Wikipedia. So it begs the obvious question. Anyone superstitious? Anyone fly AA from New York to LA? And we're going to move on to the TCA crash. Now, this is a crash cover that we've seen lots. They're very regularly. You can see them in auctions. This is a partially burned cover, and here's the back of it. And here's more information, but there are some interesting information about it. It's just a prop liner. Tail was clipped by the RCF Harvard, traveling in the opposite direction. Both planes crashed, killing all 35 on the TCA, the pilot, and a woman on the ground, into whose house the plane fuselage crashed. There's the that's not the identical planes, just similar planes. This particular letter had an interesting cover had an interesting letter in it from the Ancient Order of Foresters. Payment of $4 dues is requested because the funeral fund is well over 100% solvent. You may recommend our sick benefit and funeral to friends with every confidence. Well, maybe there might have been some claims as a result of this crash. They are still very big now, Foresters International, mutual funds, brokers, and big in insurance. Here's the ambulance cover for it. It carries that injured letter to its original destination. Fairly straightforward. They put the injured letter into the ambulance cover. They transfer the address from the original cover onto the ambulance cover, and then the cover is sent to the addressee together with an apology. And this is the kind of apology that was sent with that letter. The Moose Jaw flight references the flight. In the aftermath, though, it's interesting. The new regulation was implemented requiring aircraft flying in opposite directions to maintain separate altitudes. So if you've ever been on a plane and you know you're traveling at 37,000 or 36 or 38 or 39,000, these are now mandated. These were mandated after that airplane crash so that they would have planes. They wouldn't have two planes flying at the same elevation in the same in opposite directions. They also moved the Moose Jaw Public Airport runway further away, and they changed their flight location rules at the RCAF base. So here's the new location, quite a bit out of town. Here's another cover from that flight. Fairly straightforward. Here's an interesting one. This is a cover that has it's OHMS free. And I was inquiring from the Dominion Bureau of Statistics who's authorized this. And I guess maybe in my presentation in March earlier this year, we talked about Gemini. So I gave Gemini a crack. And with Gemini, we had agreed on a protocol. Please follow our research protocol. No narrative, no hallucinations. Here I have a cover sent by Dominion Bureau of Statistics, ... Who signed the letter? I gave them some instructions. The authorized hand stamp is from Herbert Marshall. Well, I think when we go back, we can see that that's not Herbert Marshall. That's W. Craig Russell or Rusher or something. So he justifies it by saying, well, the W is a cursive broad capital H. It's not even close, but it made all this up. Okay. Well, then I said to it, of course, please try again. It is clearly a W to start. And then he comes back with the signatory as W. Craig Rothwell. That's possible. Served as an administrative officer within Administrative Services Personnel Division. Yeah, distinct capital W, highly legible cursive Craig, and a rapidly penned compressive Bothwell. Well, what is your source for the description of his signature? I have to apologize and directly correct my previous response. In strictly prioritizing your constraints, a clear W. Craig, I hallucinated the existence of official name W. Craig Rothwell and fabricated a description of his signature to fit your physical description of the cover. This was an AI generation error, not historical fact. W. Craig Rothwell, there's no record serving as an authorized signing officer. You violated our agreed upon protocol. You hallucinated a name and narrative. Your apology is just another one in a long list of them. Your artificial intelligence service is exactly that, where intelligence, the total intelligence, where I'm using artificial in the context of the word where it means not genuine. You're entirely right. There's no excuse for it. Breaking the protocol by manufacturing a name and a narrative is a complete failure of genuine research. Well, so we had to go back at that a little bit, but that didn't work. So we're going back to the flight again. Here we have another one from 1954. from the Civil Service Commission of Canada. I guess they're still, in the post-war period, they're still being very, very careful in using up old paper. It should have been Her Majesty's Service because the Queen had come to the throne a couple of years before. Here's what's interesting about it, though, is a job description for a technician grade 1. And for the maintenance and repair of teletype and cipher equipment. You had to apply before April 21st. So this is a letter going out to some group asking if they were interested in applying for jobs with the government. We're going to go back in time a little bit, back to 1945, just for an RCAF crash cover, Biggin Hill. Fairly straightforward. COA free. Cover salvaged from the military crash. Military crash, there's much less information about them. And so that was in January of 1945. This is Lamb Airways crash cover from Grace Lake, 1955. This is a portion of the crash from a Noorden Norseman. Now, you may recognize that Norseman float plane. Here's a newspaper article about it. They were just taking off. They were overloaded, and they crashed into a ditch just beside the road. And that plane is the one that's featured on this 1982 stamp, Canadian postage stamp, or that style of plane. Not the exact one, obviously. Here's a part of the cover. Contents all ripped up. And, of course, the post office apology letter that came with it. Now we're moving forward to 1970. The crash cover in Toronto. It crashed in an aborted landing attempt. Some of us may remember that. There's lots of details on the crash available. This is an interesting cover because it's personal. The cover is mailed to a personal friend, Rose Fulda. That's her name right there. And she graciously gave it to me in 2011. So a personal friend addressed, so it's an ambulance cover or an aircraft crash cover addressed to a personal friend. And here's another one, jet spoilers inadvertently deployed in the air. Another fairly straightforward. Now we're going to go into an interrupted mail, a train fire, fairly straightforward. Seller's research suggests it could have been a fire in a baggage car attached to the Toronto, London, and Windsor CNR number 9 on December 23rd. It looks like a Christmas card size. Now we're going to go into another 1896. Now we're going to go into those that have fallen in hard times in the water. So this is an 1896 OHMS. Immersion in the sea. And there's the postal marking, and we're going to zoom that in quickly there, what it looks like. Signed by Dr. G.M. Dawson, Director of the Geological Service in Canada. And I'm hoping maybe at the end in the question and answer session, someone can tell me, is someone else doing an exhibit or a presentation on Geological Survey of Canada correspondence from a fellow named Dawson? Because if so, that cover may be of interest to them. Postage was required. What couldn't be free because the addressee was in Belgium. So they likely put a 5-cent small queen. The UPU rate, and there's no details on the reason for the immersion in water. Could have been any of a variety of, from a sinking of a ship to a simple dropping a bag off the gangway when they're dropping a bag of mail into the water when it's on the gangway or something. So it could be a whole range of immersions. Now we're going to go into the Empress of Ireland shipwreck mail. That's the second ship that we're going to look at. And it's fairly straightforward. Passenger deck, some details on the ship. It was a little bit long, quite a bit long, shorter than the Titanic, 28 meters. For 11 versus 19, about 1,500 passengers in 3 classes, crew of 420, 6 days across, 192 trips, 170,000 passengers over its lifetime. And here's in first class, about 300 passengers. It looks a lot like modern cruise ships with the stairs and fancy dining rooms. Second class was 450 passengers. Third class is 300. Price, and they could take the second class and make more first class cabins out of it, or make more third class, or those are a fudge type category, $30 to $35. Now, how much was $30 to $35 in 1914? Well, let's look at that. Statistics Canada, a wonderful website. Average wages of farm help in Canada by province 1909, 1910, and 1914 to 1916. We're looking at 1914. The per month in summer season for males was about $35. Females, $20, including board. And so you'd say that you can know that this was about the price of an economy ticket. If you felt that you could get across for 1 month's wages, $35, that would be the cost. I could see why people would think that that would be fairly reasonable if they wanted to come to a new country full of hope. So 1 month's farm wages for a male. There's a wonderful source for that. Canada's Titanic left Quebec May 14th, 2 a.m. in the morning. After dropping off the harbor pilot, it collided with a coal ship, Storstad, coming in to pick up the harbor pilot. Heavy fog rammed the side. Within 14 minutes, it sank. 1,000 people died, 465 survived. The death toll was actually, the total death toll was less than Titanic's 1514, but the passenger death toll of 840 was 22 more than the Titanic. The Titanic lost 696 crew members because they weren't allowed to get into the lifeboats. That wasn't the issue here. The issue here with the Empress was it just sank so quickly, it didn't matter. You got off deck and in the water. You found a boat, and there's the site. Just as you're coming up from Quebec City, and that's as far as they made it that night. About 8.5 kilometers from shore. Here's a green stamp recovered by divers, fairly straightforward, nothing special. And here's the second cover, shipwreck cover, again recovered by divers with the ambulance cover. I'm not going to spend too much time on covers here, but I am going to spend time about that. The Empress of Ireland and postal stationery. Interesting. What was this card? Toronto, June 5th. With a nice slogan cancel from the CNE, 2014. What's on the other side? It's a pre-printed envelope. The greatest disaster, whoops, I'm going ahead of myself, with the greatest disaster in Canadian history. It's the story of the Empress of Ireland. Published by John Winston Company Limited in Toronto. The only authoritative book about the disaster. An astonishing array of photographs and artist drawings. This is published 5 days after posted 5 days after the crash. Full account of the appalling accident. One of the most thrilling stories ever written, told by a master pen. Extraordinary opportunity for the money making. Only $1. So, best terms to agents, complete outfit free and postpaid. So if you wanted to make money, you felt that you could sell some of these books. You could buy them from $1 and sell them for whatever you felt you could, I guess. Here's the author was R. Logan Marshall, and here's the front page of the book, containing the statements of Captain Henry George Kendall from the Empress of Ireland and Thomas Anderson, commanding the Storstad. Here's the website that you can get that from. The real name was Logan Howard Smith. He wrote books to order. He's a hack in the term. Apparently, that's what the trade calls it. He would just be given a subject to write about, and he'd write the book. Very melodramatic style. We're going to get some examples of it in a few minutes. Wrote 22 books. Sinking of the Titanic, story of the Polar Conquest. Again, there was disaster in those. True story of our national calamity of flood, fire, and tornado. I've never heard of that one or seen. And he had a very strong Christian background. So he wrote the Wonder Book of Bible Stories. We'll see that coming through in one of his stories here too. And basically what he wanted to do was to satisfy public curiosity about current events. And in that respect, I don't think humans are any different than they were 112 years ago. We hear about some disaster. We hear about flooding on the Mississippi River. What do? We go to YouTube. We want to see those cars floating down the river. or whatever the disaster is, we want to read about it too, and we want to know about it. And so that's what he was doing with all his various books, satisfying that curiosity that people have to want to read about the tragedy that befalls other people. Published in July 7, less than 6 weeks, less than 2 weeks after the Quebec inquiry concluded. 319 pages, 32 figures, 351 total pages. It's reprinted in 2012 and an ebook in 2014. Both the ebook versions are available online to be downloaded, which I did, except the figures are copyright. So they did not, in the ebook, they did not produce any of the pictures, just the text. Table of contents, we're just going to go a few highlights, both their statements. Those would have been from the Quebec inquiry, the notable passengers aboard who died, the tragic story of Titanic, the most sumptuous palace afloat. He talks a little bit about the Titanic too, which he's probably taken from the other book. And at the end, the life safety and life-saving devices, the seeking safety at sea. So there's a little of a technical side to this book, which I felt was important. First of all, some quotes from Logan Marshall. A blow, a ripping, the side taken out of a ship, darkness, the inrush of waters, a panic, and then in the hush, the silent corpses drifting by. So with the Canadian liner. From every center of great calamity, waves, here he's keeping the nautical theme, of sympathetic sorrow spread, alliteration, to far distant strangers, but the perishing of great numbers in a shipwreck seems to impress our human nature more profoundly than do accidents or visitations of other kinds in which the toll of death is as great. I presume when he's referring to visitations, he's talking to the death, the plagues and medical type issues. Again, very dramatic sentences. The Empress of Ireland was rammed by another vessel, so crushed as to remain unable to remain afloat for more than 15 minutes. Overwhelmed by the catastrophe, we fall back upon that faith in the unseen power, which is never shaken by the appearance of what seems to be unnecessary evil or inexplicable cruelty. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Yea, it is only when God seems to slay us that we can trust in him. For trust begins only when knowledge fails, just as the stars shine only when the sun is gone. Very, very impressive writing, and we can see why he's a popular author. I say there's also the technical note, which I'm impressed with, because they talk about another opinion is that the use of the submarine bell would have prevented the collision of the Storstad and the Empress of Ireland. The bell is in use on light ships, but seagoing vessels use only the receivers, and the utility of the warnings by sound underwater between approaching vessels is not appreciated. It's an underwater sound-emitting device using the strokes of a bell to send messages, or to send at stated intervals a signal. Now, sound travels faster through water than it does through land. One of the reasons, perhaps, that the submarine bell wasn't used, that there were patent issues around it, and so it hadn't. The patent hadn't expired on it yet, so there was a bit of an issue about that. But still, interesting that they noted it in his book. It wasn't something he felt it was important to talk about safety issues. This is a most bizarre thing, I would call it. It's an RMS morning postcard, a postcard with a black border. And these are carrying ashore the dead as recovered by the lady. The Lady Grey was the another ship that came to the rescue and retrieved survivors. But has anyone ever seen a morning postcard that you would send to someone, presumably? It's not as if you're sending it as an announcement of someone you know who has died. An interesting concept of a morning postcard. We can talk about it in the Q&A if anyone's ever seen or heard anything else like that for a disaster. Were there ever any issued for the Titanic? Okay, we're going to go on to the latest shipwreck, which is the NS steamship Nascapi, July 1947, built 1911 for Job Brothers and Co. in St. John's. Initial service was an annual sea hunt plus other general merchandise and transportation. It had an icebreaker design, quite a novel icebreaker design. And the subarctic, the Nascapi is named for the subarctic First Nations of the Quebec Labrador interior. Apparently, when you're looking at icebreakers, there's two ways you can design a sub icebreaker. One is just with a strong bow and a knife edge that cuts through the ice. And the other design is the icebreakers is an icebreaker that goes on top of the ice, and then by its sheer weight, it breaks the ice underneath it. Here's a notice to sealing crews that the Nascapi you could sign them to be a crew member sign on March 10th and 11th, and you would sail on the March 13th. So they had these 4 different ships. You could sign on any one of these and become a member of a sealing crew. The Nascapi. Much of the information you'll see in this presentation comes from this Arctic Lifeline HBSS Nascapi, Peter Kohler. We look down here, we see this is the first page in this website. Page 1 of 467. There's 467 pages just in this, and this is just scans of graphics. This is all graphics. There's no text on these pages. And there's a fabulous Blogspot article on it. Every year they talk about what happened, what stops it went, how many tons it had, all the details on it. Fabulous resource. You'll see some of it here. This is one of the earlier pictures where they're leaving the ship for the seal hunt on some island, somewhere. They don't explain where it is. And now it did serve in the war. After working for the Russian government, she goes to Hudson's Bay. And here, her role there was to deliver supplies to the Inuit people and HP Hudson Bay stations out there where the furs were collected. And in 1933, they refurbished the ship, added cabins, and they offered cruises. And you could either do a partial cruise or the full 90 days. So they would start in Montreal. We're looking at them, follow my mouse here. They came around from Montreal, around Labrador, and into Hudson's Bay, first James Bay, down to James Bay to where you get off at Mosinee if you like, just for a short trip. Or you could stay on and get off at Churchill over there. And if you wanted to do the full cruise, you stayed on and went all the way from Churchill around up to the very northernmost ports, and then worked your way down and finally got off the ship in St. John's. So it's a long roundabout cruise, but I said here, this one says 90 days for $850. I'd seen other prices. I'm not sure what year this was, for $650. So that's about the price. And they had 6 to 10 people berths, and they had no problems filling the seats. Here now, this in 1935, a couple of years later, it's now can fly the Royal Mail pennant for the first time. It's been authorized to carry mail starting in 1935. It started service in 1914. So it was doing a lot for the first 21 years before it actually started carrying mail. And here's the announcement. And previous mail for the Eastern Arctic, Ellesmere, Baffin, and points on Hudson Bay. All classes of mail except COD will be accepted for delivery. Rate of postage for the parcel post. You paid for the posted connection with the steamer at Montreal. If you wanted it to go to Montreal, you could have it picked up and sent to Montreal. You paid that postage to Montreal, or you could pay the postage and have it sent to Churchill and care of RMS Nascapi, Montreal, or Churchill. So they established this mail service in 1935. Here we have the postal workers aboard the ship. Honorable W.G. Martin Lent and his assistants in marking cachets. required. They had it was the philatelic mail was a big part of the ship, and it's thousands and thousands, 80 bags of mail in one case, at least. So the letters reached the most northerly post office. Here we have a message from His Majesty the King to his Eskimo subjects. And the Eskimos received the king's greetings. Well, what did the king actually say? Here we are. The message of King George, who rules the British Empire, and of Queen Mary, his wife, to the Inuit. The Queen and I send to our loyal Inuit subjects who dwell throughout northern Canada and on the shores of Labrador, a message of greeting from our home in the great encampment of London. In every part of the British Empire, be it ever so many sleeps from our encampment, the happiness of our subjects deeply affects the personal happiness of the Queen and myself. Here, someone's coached them not to talk about the city of London, because Inuit don't know about cities. They just talk about encampments. So they're using the phrase of the great encampment of London. And they talk in Inuit, of course, you talk not about miles and kilometers and distances. You say, how many sleeps is it away? So he uses the Inuit lingo, I guess you'd call, and in his message to the Inuit. From his great encampment of London, so many sleeps from our encampment. Interesting writing. I found it cute. And we have some postal history from that. This one just has a postal marking up here, Eastern Arctic Mail, Lake Harbor, to Baffin Island. And on the back is a map, some postal marks. It's a registered letter. Now, the sender and the receiver is the Real Estate Board of Victoria. Obviously, he's sending it to himself as a registered letter. I can only assume that he mailed the letter to Montreal to be picked up by the Naskipi in Montreal, carried to Lake Harbor, and he addressed it probably to the postmaster at Lake Harbor. Postmaster would open the mail, pull out this letter, cancel it, put it back on the Naskipi to return it to him. That's the only explanation, the only possible explanation I can have. But I have to admit that I am not fully versant in how the Naskipi worked in terms of how these letters were handled. And we do know that it was likely transferred off the ship after Churchill on August 13th. Here it was July 27th. It arrived in the 13th in Churchill. It's backstamped August 20th in Winnipeg. It took a week to get there from Churchill down to Winnipeg, and another 3 days to get from Vancouver to Vancouver. So that's the hypothesis. He mailed it to Montreal and to the postmaster. And here we have another cover. There's no indication at all on this that there's Naskipi or other Eastern Arctic mail markings. Nothing on the front, nothing on the back. If you didn't know that it was they carried on the only way you know is by looking at the date and confirming with the Naskipi records that yes, it was in Ponds Inlet on September 4th, 1936. But there's an interesting dispatch down here, published and dispatched by Fife and Gray, the stamp shop, Union Street, Birmingham 2. Interesting that obviously the stamp dealers in the UK were interested in this. Continuing, the final cover here is from 1940, Naskipi Tour, the Pagneertum, September 22nd. It does have the Naskipi cachet, but as I mentioned, it's not on all covers. 3 cents paying the rate to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And on the back, there's an Eastern Arctic mail service. We've seen that before on other Naskipi covers. Very straightforward. So that's it for the Naskipi. Oh, one more final. Oh, we have one more cover. In 1947, it was off on its 33rd trip to the far north. It was to be its final trip. A new ship had already been planned for delivery for the 1948 route, but it's wrecked In the Arctic, she served so many years, runs aground, everyone's safe. Framed Arctic vessel loss, total loss. This was page 446 of 467 in that book, in that reference. And here's also the map of where it took off from Montreal, went around to St. John's, came up here, around, and just off the Baffin Island here at Cape Dorset is where it sank. It still had an awful lot of the journey to do, all the way down to Moosonee, back up to Churchill, and all the way around up to the north parts of the island, Baffin Island. So it had just basically started. And Captain Waters had elected to bring her in himself, relying on the depth sounder and radar. He didn't accept the offer of the Inuit pilot who was familiar with the waters. Fortunately, no lives were lost. Most of the mail was recovered. Some of the parcels got wet and it took about 3 months, though. It was on the reef for almost 3 months before they finally took her to the bottom. It allowed lots of time to salvage items. Fairly straightforward. Here's the cover. The Reverend Cole in Stirling, Ontario, with the postal marking salved from the sea. And here's the label on it. They didn't put it in ambulance covers. So they just said, here, there's the back stamp. This mail was received in damaged condition, being salved from the wreck. That's going to be lost at Cape Dorset, Canadian Arctic, July 22nd, which actually was the 21st. The original stamp, loosened by seawater, has been reaffixed. That's a little unusual for those covers from the sea, but I guess they realized that there was a lot of philatelic mail and it was important. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next category, an interrupted mail, a temporary suspension of postal service. 2020, postal service to Qatar was suspended due to lack of flights. Here's a cover of my daughter mailed to me. It was sent to Qatar with a return because of COVID. Their flight service to Qatar was eliminated from Canada. And so it had to go. Then they put this 2-part label on it. That once the label was, so it was returned to my daughter. And then later on, after service was resumed, she peeled off the top label and it said resume service, postage paid. And then I got it back in October. The first postmark is in July. Here's another example. Again, this has got the front label on it. And two-part label. And then you would remove this once you'd remove it. And then you could see what we saw on the last cover as a cover that could be reposted without it being having to re-canceled again, postage. So there it is with the label removed. Fairly straightforward. Now you'll know this is CP65, but this also has, talked about this previously, they lose all of their denominations with time. This looks like it did say a 2. You can see a bit of a 2 there, but the CP stamps, printings 3, 4, and 5, in my collection, they've all lost all their ink, thermal printed ink. Here's the interrupted letter. Oh, sorry, this is interrupted mail where vandalism was the problem and received in damaged condition. And the apology letter, the enclosed item mailed to you and is damaged in an act of vandalism. I think someone threw matches into the mailbox in one of our street letter boxes by persons unknown. We regret the inconvenience caused, and they still forwarded it on. Here's another interrupted mail theft. Again, this is a new one. October 1975. It's explained in the apology letter. Thieves in Levy stole a mail bag destined for the Canada Post Distribution Center in Rivière-du-Loup. Mail was recovered by police and turned over to postal officials. And here is the apology letter saying that basically October 17th, the police, but I've just repeated it. And here's the ambulance cover for it. And so we've seen 4 examples of interrupted covers. We've seen the plane crash, we've seen the railroad fire, we've seen a shipwreck, and we've seen the service suspension. So the question that I have to ask, you may know the answer. What is a collective noun for a bunch of letters? We talk about a pod of dolphins, a herd of deer. What is it for? A stack of letters, yeah, if they're nicely on top of each other. But what else can we call them? According to Merriam-Webster in the dictionary, it's a mail of letters from the French word mail, which means mesh and refers to the mailbag carried by the postman. And with that, thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Arnie. That was fantastic. We have a few comments in the chat here. There's some talk about some new books. Tinnika mentioned a new book appeared in the mid 2025 about the Empress of Ireland, written by Eve Lazarus and named Beneath Dark Waters. Also, Thomas Haynes indicated that mourning postcards are common in Europe. I have a number of them for relatives from the 1930s to a few years ago. And then Thomas posted a website for everyone to save for some mourning postcards.
But were they mourning for an event? Like the simping of the I can understand your mourning postcard if you're telling about the death of your aunt or your uncle, where you have this postcard in a mourning, but a blank mourning card where it's commemorating some mass event. That's the part that's different. I can understand mourning covers and mourning postcards if you're sending it to someone else. So maybe whoever knows about that, if these German ones are actually describing a particular event in history that or if it's just your general I'm notifying you that Aunt Helen died a week ago. That's the curious part of it. So maybe whoever answered that question can explain a little bit more when we open up the floor.
Okay. Great. And also there's a website for Titanic mourning postcards
Oh,
that
okay.
has been posted as well.
That would certainly be comparable. Yep.
Lots of information tonight. And Lisa has also said that if anyone wants to make a service suspension cover, you can send something to a suspended country. And she has attached the website below. You can click on that or save that website.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's Canada Post's list of the countries they're currently not delivering to.
Oh.
They're service advisories.
Okay, I think I can probably stop sharing. Is there any other questions that I need to go back to? Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Arnie. It's your interrupted mail presentation is and associated research is outstanding. Before we close tonight, we'd like to acknowledge the lands we're on, and we'd like to thank Longley Auctions again. So please visit longleyauctions.com, and hopefully you can find some interrupted mail yourself. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us next time for Stamp Talks with Maringla and British atomic bomb tests in Australia, 1952 to 1967, presented by David Foote. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.